Hello there, and welcome to a new build guide for the Reaver faction. This time, I got REAVER Necromancers for you. We all love Necromancers, don't we? And even if the current state of Necromancers makes me a little bit sad, I was still able to put up a build that made me happy, that features almost all of the undead units that are out there and works swimmingly in brutal difficulty. I even fought off a barbarian dragon ruler invasion with that build, so I felt like, yeah, it should work out for a lot of options. It is very support heavy, and it leans very, very hard into the dark affinity. We're going to talk about the strategy and all those things alongside of the video. I want to get started here with the racial and cultural traits first. So with this one, I went for my typical approach. Sneaky for Reaver factions just is a sweet thing. We can flank a lot, but this is one of the things which I feel like can be exchanged. Worthy recommendations are poisonous or things that make you hit harder even if your casualties are higher. I really feel like this is, for this particular build, a exchangeable point. Hardy, I just like that. Fill in whatever 1-point trait you like if you don't like it, but please stick to the overwhelm tactics for this build, because your undead summons happen to have the trigger on this as well, or at least a part of them, but most importantly, your backliners really need that to hit harder, in my experience. But feel free to let me know what you guys think. Trait-wise, I went here for mana channelers because, obvious reasons, we do use a lot of mana and we have a lot of really good units that we can summon, and therefore I really like the mana conservation in the summoning spell costs. I still have problems with mana because there's just so much good stuff that you can do with it. I really like that one. And powerful evokers is a very versatile thing. We rock a lot of supporters, battle mages too, and therefore this is a very, very synergistic thing. Also, it gives us the capability to start with a support unit, which is for the Reavers really powerful because you have access to subdue right from the get-go. You have immobilization due to your spell, and due to your harriers, you can just subdue enemies right from the start, which is amazing, and only possible with this trait. There's other worthy mentions. I think runesmiths for the cheaper unit enchantments would work really, really well, but also if you'd like the new relentless slavers, or how it's called, this new slavery cultural trade would work really, really well too, because we work with moral destruction. So feel free to choose what you like here. There is some wriggling room for alternatives as usual. So, tomes. Let's talk tomes. This was a really, really tough nut to crack, but I'm happy with the stuff that I came up with. So we're starting out with the Tome of Souls. Obviously, this gives us a kickstart into the necromancy business. The Bone Horror is a really cool charging shock unit that can be created out of skeletons that falls apart into skeletons. It's fairly cheap, it doesn't cost gold to recruit, only souls. I love it. Soul collection is really important for your entire economy. Basically allows you to buy 6 souls for 5 gold each per turn. Try to get that rolling as quick as possible. It's just really, really powerful for your entire career. Soulfire is a good burst, cheap, powerful, and versatile. Stays useful throughout all parts of the game to clear out low tier units or stuff like that. It's a really cool one. I like it especially because it's low casting costs. Soul Overflow is really cool, especially since it's a spell that costs souls, not mana, and it is a 1 hex radius mini steroid, but most importantly, negative effect purger on a tier 1 tome. Tasty. The extra HP here are also worth mentioning because it's maximum HP and we're stock loaded with supporters, so we can use these extra HPs. And Soulbinders is, since we have our army composed as we do, is a really, really good thing. You can also put that on your heroes, but I didn't like it too much because it's just prevalent on many, many other units that I didn't need it. And of course, you can recruit skeletons in your cities once you have that tome. The other tier 1 tome to go for is Tome of Faith. It opens up the Staves of Mending, which allows your supporters to have 2 heals. But most importantly, Mending Touch is a free action. Since your overseers have to stand next to their target anyways, this is a highly synergistic skill for them, effectively increasing their healing potential from 40 to 55, or just 15 if you just need a slight heal. I experienced that this thing is insanely good for your overseers, much better than I expected it to be. And also, Faithful reduces unit upkeep, which is never a bad thing in its own right. So, the chaplains are useful, but you shouldn't rely too much on them. Their only real unique sales point is a fairly useful buff, especially cool because you can improve critical hit. But apart from that, I'm not too happy with their composure of spells. I do like that you have a status effect purge on them. Usually I have one of them on my 18 unit stack, but not more than that. There's just better alternatives in our build. But what I really do love for this build is the convent. Keep your cities happy and you crank out substantial amounts of knowledge and mana. And if you just spam out stability buildings, that ain't too hard, I experienced with this build. Also, Wrath of the Faithful is really cool because you have a lot of supporters on your battlefield, and due to Staves of Mending, they are all of a sudden faithful, and you actually have a pretty nice burst spell with that. I was surprised how much the supporters crank up the damage on that one. But one of my hidden stars in this one is the Abbey, giving you a free research post for every city that you want to go for, and it's even synergistic if you happen to build farms, which is fairly rare. I only build them usually for the quest or whatever, but the ability to build a research post wherever you want to, amazing. Also, don't skip the Mending Touch on your heroes. It's a free action after all, and this build thrives on its ubiquitous healing abilities. Now, let's move on to tier 2. I went here for Necromancy first. Obviously, this is what we use to bolster up our necromantic ranks. Restore Undead is a really cool army spell, especially later down the road our entire species will turn undead, so you can heal your armies with souls again. This is extremely valuable because it allows you to conserve your valuable mana. Rotting Explosion turns your summoned units out of the Raise Zombies spell or from your Necromancers into walking grenades. It's a really cool thing because it's a 2 hex radius explosion, and decaying is a very powerful status. Also 30 damage is nothing to sneeze at either for a ridiculous amount of 10 mana. Now, Raise Zombies, like I said, 1 hex radius turns into decaying zombies. This is one of the most potent summoning spells in the game, if you happen to fire it off in the right moment. And it's again, soul-based. I love it for that. Necrotic Magic, it is powerful. You rock a lot of supporters, like I said, and your supporters can now inflict decaying, which is one of the more powerful status effects that I know of, and it also counters enemy support strategies. So it's basically doubly effective because you're using a ton of support, and with that spell, you're starting to deny the enemy of their support until they have a lot of stats cleansing, but that is a must-have after this unit enchantment. This is one of the most powerful out there for this build, actually. It's a real game breaker. Corrupt Souls are also amazing. You get to summon these guys yet again with souls. You just have to pay the mana upkeep, and they are amazing tier 3 throwaway units that have a ton of damage, destroy the enemy's morale, which is really brutal in the longer period of combat, and they can just outright murder people with low moral. The real power play part about these is that they are dirty cheap. The upkeep of them is costly, yes, but you just don't have to invest too many souls, and since we have lowered summoning costs, I really like that lowered summoning costs trait in this build for a reason. Necromancers. They will accompany your overseers and do a lot of heavy lifting. They can create zombies, like I said, really useful combo for the rotting explosion. They get the mending touch as well, so they start to be healers after all, and they can strengthen undead as sort of a free action. This is again really cool because they can walk up to somebody, buff, and then raise undead or fire. Very, very versatile and powerful supporters, and as a tier 3 unit, their Frost Blast has quite some whack behind it by now. Unholy Leader, don't sleep on that because your undead will only grow more numerous the longer the game goes, and the Soul Well gives you then the ability to crank out more mana out of your research posts, but most importantly, you gain extra souls, which allows you to crank out all those soul summons more reliably. Really, really good. The other tier 2 tome I went for is this time Tome of the Doom Herald. I did a lot of thinking about that one, but I considered, due to the fact that you can destroy morals so effectively, it's really good. It's just really, really good. And mind you also that high moral is now possible for undead as well, so crits hit harder with stuff like cruel weaponry as well, also for undead people, which brings me to the spells. So we can hit harder against low moral targets. This is alone a really, really powerful enchantment, especially with this stuff that we rock. The Banshees are, well, I personally like them because they are summonable, but beyond that, they are basically moral destroy and hand grenades. They die quickly, and if you have the mana to sport them, they are fairly costly. Bring them out, whip them in, and don't mind them dying. They are not meant to really be sturdy or long-lasting units if you want to use the Wail of the Banshee. And if you don't, you really miss out a lot of their action there. So they're really meant to be hand grenades in my experience. Prelude of Doom is a really nasty thing because it lets the enemy army start with low morals, combine that with cause despair, and you are already outright at murdering moment for the corrupt souls right from the beginning of the fight. Really, really nasty stuff. Joy Siphoners destroys more of the enemy morals, and Cruel Weaponry, I already went over that. And Doom Depth Trench, yeah, we have a conduit, my friends. A very, very powerful conduit cranking out mana and knowledge. The Doom Herald Tome has a lot of goodies, and I recommend you to check them out. Cruel Weaponry, if you put that on a Magelock hero, it is insane when you score a crit. Just some side note, out of good experience. Great Transformation is where your Necromancy build is kind of like complete. You go for Whiteborn, effectively giving all your racial units lifesteal, which is wow. It makes your whole sustainability game plan even easier to fulfill, and at that point I really felt like super powerful. We run Fetid Legion as well because why not? It's more HP, it's a weakening aura, and yeah, what's not to like about that? The Domain of Death is here again a very, very powerful spell. If you can afford it, it plays super well into the convent because more knowledge and mana out of happy cities. So yeah, you're playing happy undead basically, but it works out way better than I expected it to be. And there's a great structure, more mana income out of souls. What's not to like about it? Then we have Weakening Aura, which is really good for melee heroes and Soul Harvest. So this is where we need to go into the more branched out version, because at this point you have options where to go to. I personally recommend Dreadnought as your second tier 3 tome. This might come in as a pretty unusual pick after all we did before, but there are a lot of hidden synergies in there. Pinning Barrage alone is a massive powerhouse. We have a bonus from marked enemies also for all of our melee units, because we can apply that to all of our summoned undead and whatnot. So this is a 2 hex radius 10% damage increase, just right from the get-go, combined with being a blast, combined with the ability to immobilize. Every immobilized enemy can be subdued by your overseers. And so basically, this is an opener for so many Reaver shenanigans that passing out on this spell alone feels like a shame when you're playing Reavers. Destabilized mana core plays into a similar venue. If you can get it off, it's really amazing, but most importantly, it gives you a option to have disruption in your build. And also I noticed that due to all these summons we got, it's fairly easy to bind the enemy in a certain area and get that thing going. It is really better than I thought. Much, much better. Admittedly, warding materials only comes into play if you happen to capture a couple of shield units, which is unlikely, so you can skip out on that. As well with tuning kits, if you happen to have construct access, though it is good, but it's not a real powerhouse here. Great Bombard, though, is a really good siege thing, because with the Reavers, you do attack a lot of cities, you do a lot of warfare, and this is why this thing is just outright good. It gives you the ability to blast at a 1 hex radius with a really, really nice range. It is a really, real powerhouse because it comes with almost no prerequisites in that form. I didn't rock the Ironclad too much, but I'd see it has capabilities of replacing a couple of your mage locks. I didn't go for it because it was too costly in my previous attempts, but that's just as a side note. The War Foundry, well, I think it is good, but I didn't really use it most of the time. I sported my armies out of recruitment by subduing enemies or summoning stuff, so this one is a little bit lost on this army. But Artillerist, if you happen to have warfare heroes, which is with the mage lock variants of the Reavers a really smart idea, this blasts. Again, it inflicts marked right from the get-go, so it's again a 10% damage buff. It's kind of like a strengthening buff, but you apply it to the enemy instead of your own units, and they can't resist it, so it's really good. And yeah, other worthy mentions that I wanted to point out too. If you don't like the whole Dreadnought idea, you can also go and backtrack into tier 2 tomes. That's no shame, they are really good. Scrying is massive for this build, because again, you gain access to another 2 Mark 1 hex radius spell, guided projectiles. Your supporters love that as well. And Summon Watcher, well, it is a stunner and a marker, so it plays well into this build, and it opens up the venue into the tier 3 amplification tome, boosting up your skirmishes like crazy. This is really powerful on skirmishes, brutally, because it is not only applying to, well, it's not applying to the ranged attacks, but to the melee attacks, but it makes the ranged attacks hit way harder. But use that only if you have access to these. I also want to point out your mage locks make fairly good use out of that too, because 30% of the damage. Sure, they fire only one time, but if they fire and hit for like 60 to 80 damage because they crit and you have marked them a lot, 30% of 60 is a lot, and that's why Amplified Arrows works as actually better for the mage locks than I thought. The rest of that, Frenzying Focus is really good for your supporters, Astral Blood is amazing for your entire species, and yeah, lots of goodness in there. I'll leave it up to you how you want to build it. There's options. I also want to mention that you can go for either Zeal or Inquisition to get into the Subjugation, which is also good because of Intimidating Aura, Final Ultimatum, and all those things that facilitate a low moral on the enemy. But after all these things, check out Reaper and Oblivion, which will complete your build. Ideal. I don't want to go too detailed over these because tier 4 tomes are just bonkers. Now, we move on over and talk about the units that we're going to run here. You will not make too much use of your tier 1 array. The Harriers are good in the early game, but later they are just too squishy. Castnet is a good source of immobilization early on. Later down the road, it's either not as important as, or you can get that out of your Suppressing Barrage surprisingly often as well, because I often just subdue whatever gets accidentally immobilized by that spell. Long story short, they aren't really scaling well up, and we don't rock the mercenaries too hard because we got skeletons, and they are also, I want to point out, benefiting from your racial traits, so they get the overwhelm tactics and all the stuff. That's why poisonous is actually a really, really good thing. And yeah, they're cheap, they're available, and they are the spoils of your warfare. Bone Horrors are really cool. If you can afford them, I like to use them in the early game, especially since they can heal themselves by just consuming corpses. They play excellent into your support gameplay. Chaplains and Overseers. I've already talked a bit about them in the Tomes section. The Overseers are basically the better choice. My personal distribution is like 2/3 Overseers and 1/3 Necromancers slash Chaplains, or, well, you can leave them out altogether. They aren't really necessary, but I do like their status, single target status purge and the booster. I do enjoy them, but they are actually not really powerful. Mage locks. Don't sleep on these. Bring at least 3 to 4 of these into your army stack of 18. If you don't have heroes that use mage locks, bring a few more. That's simply because they can apply marking to enemies if they can't fire. So the Reavers work like that, in case you haven't known already. Focused aggression gives you 10% more damage per stack of marked, so it is good even for the melees to be striking something which is marked, and engraving a focus allows you to just apply that bonus on every summoned undead unit that is melee, and therefore, yeah, the mage locks are, as a matter of fact, soft supporters by enhancing the damage on single targets and clearing out squishies or bringing supportive fire. Their shots are piercing, they can crit, and like I said, there's plenty of options to upgrade them. They're really, really good. And as you see here, I haven't even built a tier 3 town hall here, because from that point on, my roster was more or less dominated by the undead. I strongly recommend you to bring as many of these corrupt soul guys as you want, or properly can pay, because they are excellent frontliners. They are gaining stats from the enemies being low on moral. They are low maintenance. They are able to move through obstacles. They are sadly spirit vulnerable, but they are also slippery and they can pass by enemies. All in all, they are just really, really brutal and available. And as you see here, the upkeep isn't that terrible, and they can be really easily spammed. I love these guys. Apart from that, we also have on the tier 3 area the Banshee. Like I said, I think I explained enough about them in the Tome section. It's just, again, I want to stress out, these guys are really more or less hand grenades and not meant to be the vital backbone and resilience things of your build. Apart from that, I want to point out that with Subdue and the War Spoils, you can fill up your roster with whatever you like, whatever comes in handy in between. As you see here, I ran into a Bone Wyvern and felt like, yeah, well, come on, my little guy, bring him in. And you can use that as well with your overlords to just overseers to just pick up whatever you need along the way. So that's basically your roster. Later you get Reapers and Living Fogs out of the tier 4 tomes, which are just super powerful, and you should get as many of them into your roster as you can realistically supply, upgrading bit by bit your old cultural units. The only thing that should never run out of your rosters, in my experience, are the supporters. I would recommend at least 33 to 40% of your banners actually being supporters, and the rest being filled up with mage locks and summoned undead. Mage locks, like I said, I fill up here a lot of my mage lock slots also with heroes running these, because they're just as good as, if not even better. Now, let's talk strategy. So your build is, again, since you're playing Reavers, stupidly powerful right from the get-go. You get to start with Harriers, and if you run the combination that I do here, you also start with an Overseer, which means you can disable one enemy, pick him up because you have a few war spoils when you begin, and you can grow your roster and start from there. I am fairly able to clear out the map on brutal difficulty very quickly with that build once you get used to these things. Just keep in mind, you want to avoid damage early on and or heal up your dudes as much as possible. So pick up a healing trait on your hero or a healing staff in the early game. Makes things on brutal a lot easier. Get your second city going as fast as possible, and get yourself some war against an NPC going as fast as possible, because war spoils are massively good for this build. 2 reasons. First off, of course, we can subdue units and pick them up as we want to. But due to the fact that our build consists out of order and shadow, we are really good with free cities. You get abilities that give you knowledge per whispering stone. You get a whispering stone here, you get a whispering stone here, you get a whispering stone there. Even if a Reaver faction doesn't start with whispering stones, you can get a lot of diplomacy going with this build. But more importantly, you can use your war spoils to force the enemy to be your friends. So you can, with this build, effectively use your war spoils also to rock a pretty diplomatic build, because you have access to a few order things due to the strong influence of order. If you pick up an extra order hero, it even gets better. I want to stay here for a hot minute to point out that you have access to the mana mines and check out the change there. So this is, since we play what we play, this is an available skill, so Reavers are really good at that, but this branch is so good for the Reavers. You gain extra knowledge from killed heroes, since we do want to wage war like crazy, super good, and you have magic origin unit upkeep reduced, which is for the necromancers, amazing yet again. We rely a lot on magical units after all, and the Court of Whispers is also important to note out that you can use it against enemies' vassals, so your Whispering Stones will never run out of order, and that's really cool. Stolen Power is also lovely, because you happen to destroy cities a lot, and Death Magic, yeah. Like I said, there's a lot of good things here going on for this build in this venue, and it is fairly unusual, but it is a Reaver build that can actually do diplomacy with the free cities or overthrow them quite quickly, because you don't rely too much on using your war spoils for subduing things. You can use it entirely for speeding up your process with the free cities. It's a really, really cool thing. I do like that a lot. Apart from that, you need to be getting out as much army as quick as possible, so try to pump your mana income into your army as hard as you can afford, and keep your gold income spread out a little bit over also army units, because you need to hire those units here, and expand your cities a little bit. Try to get to 3 cities as quick as possible. With this build, you can easily overrun one of the 3 cities at some point, depending on luck. On brutal difficulty, sometimes you just get outright insane racial combos that cannot be overrun as easily. If you notice that a free city rocks something like this here because it just starts out with that, feel free to instead found a 3rd city yourself. You have, after all, access to materium as well, so military engineering will help you in that regard as well. Don't think, though, that you will get too much going with the nature affinity. That I don't know where I picked that up. Either way, you are most strong once you picked up your first tier 2 tome. That was for me the point of the hostile takeover, because of the zombie spells and or corrupt souls. These are the points where I feel like the build tosses in so many throwaway units on the enemy that it becomes really unbearable. And another thing, you are a heal monster, so try to bait the enemy into damaging one of your units that sustains the blow, and then heal them up and counter and repeat. That's really powerful with this build, because the AI is really bad at determining how much you can heal back up. So I went here all in on my hero builds, also on full-on support, mass rejuvenation, the other spells for restore, mending touch also on the heroes, to just keep your units alive and counter out of that. You have a lot of free action healing, and that is stupidly powerful. And your economy is strong because of the happiness bonuses, and yeah, I love that build. It has been a really, really good ride, and I hope you enjoy it too. Feel free to leave me your comments, leave a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and as usual, thanks for watching. Thanks for the support on the channel. Check out Patreon, PayPal, or buy me a coffee if you want to join on in. And thanks yet again for watching this video. See you there, and have a good day.